The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 teachers in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with the Tennessee academic standards. For more professional development videos, check out our website at cem.mtsu.edu. This video is aligned with the following Tennessee academic standards.
We have a website. If you haven't gone to it yet, there's always under the What's New column a link to our upcoming workshops. Go ahead and take a look and see what's coming up in your area. Next week we're going to be in Knoxville for a 2-day workshop on using text-based primary sources. And then on the week after that is our 3-day Summer Institute on Jim Crow. Building community in an age of Jim Crow. That's going to be in Brownsville, so 3 hours west of here. So that's 3 weeks, 3 different grand divisions. The next time we're doing something here in Middle Tennessee is going to be a 2-day institute in partnership with Tennessee State Library and Archives on the topic of Reconstruction, and that's taking place in July. So you'll all want to come out to that, because not only are you going to get to do stuff with the Library of Congress primary sources, but you also get to do stuff with actual primary sources in your hands from the Tennessee State Library and Archives and their education crew there. So that's going to be great. All right. Any questions before I get started? No? Oh, I had a question. Did I hear somebody taught at Riverdale? You did? Oh, I graduated from Riverdale. Yes, way back in 1994. Okay, so that was a long time ago. I don't think any of the teachers that I had there are still there, but I think some of them might still be teachers.
It was still new when I taught there.
Oh my gosh. Well, if any of you sat in on Dr. Carol Van West's thing this morning, I think he was part of the first graduating class at Riverdale. So some of us have really deep Murfreesboro roots. Anyway, okay, so yay, go Warriors. Okay, this is a session that I first gave at the, what did I do this at? Oh, sorry, I'm momentarily getting Tenchi mixed up with TCSS. One of those works, I think it was TCSS. That's right. It was the Tennessee Council for Social Studies conference that was this year in Gatlinburg. Was anybody there? You were? Did you come to my session? No? Okay, good. No repeats. Awesome.
So I wanted to, but I was torn.
I'm not offended at all. There's lots of good stuff going on. It was a good conference. Okay, I'm gonna blow through a few of these slides because I'd rather get to the primary sources at the end. But basically, I turned in the proposal for this right when the whole idea of fake news was being plastered all over everything that we looked at every day, and now it's just kind of like, oh, I feel like I hear that phrase way too often. So I wanted to look at a media-based primary source activity and talk about how we trust things that we read in newspapers and that kind of thing. So that's the idea of fake news is a little bit woven into this, but it's mostly going to be we'll get to the part about corroboration and multiple perspectives. So how do we actually decide what sources we trust? Anyone?
Length of time on the year.
Okay, so the length of time they've been on the air?
The author.
If the author's reputation?
Previous report.
I'm sorry? What? What? Do they spend what?
I just said previous reporting. I mean,
Previous reporting?
Trends and stuff.
Good.
I was going to say, do they have to print a lot of corrections or retractions?
Okay, do they correct themselves? Yes.
Are they self-contradictory or something? I always hammer at my kids. Are they saying something that contradicts something else they're saying? Is there a consistency with what you do know?
Okay. Good. All right. And then how do we actually decide what to trust within a source that we are reading?
Adequate citations.
Citations, good.
I think being well-versed in the literature regarding the topic to an extent.
Okay. Any thoughts? See, one of the problems I have with my college students here at MTSU, upperclassmen in history, is when we read a primary source like Herodotus, and Herodotus is talking about a woman with 3 snake heads or something like that. They're like, obviously, he's the father of lies, so I can't trust anything that he writes ever. And so they want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. They think that because a source may not say one thing that's accurate, that the entire source is inaccurate. And that might be the case, but I want them to think about, well, what within a source do you feel like you can trust? And a lot of people make these decisions without even realizing they're doing it. So this kind of activity builds off of those feelings, right, that you have when you read a source that you may not think about. What do you trust and what do you not trust? So separating it into what seems like it's true and what seems like the author is using an opinion or a judgment here. So this activity is going in a lot of different directions at once, but you'll get it when we get a little bit further in. Okay, so what is the purpose of news sources?
To inform.
Inform, yeah.
To persuade,
Persuade.
to entertain,
Entertain.
To make money.
Make money. To influence, right, all these things. I think that there's this idea that news sources nowadays have to be 100% objective. And of course, it'd be ideal if they were. But if you look at newspapers from like the 19th century, for example, they were totally biased. They were totally spouting a position that represented their publisher, and that was how it was. That was how they did it, and that was the expectation as well back then. So even expectations for news sources has changed over time, and they need to know that when they're reading sources from a different era. Oh, yeah. I don't have time for this, but truthiness, yeah, this is the clip from 2006 that invented the word truthiness, which apparently has made its way into the dictionary now. And this is where I talk about satire, which we're not going to do today. Satire, that's a really great source, which I'll send to you if you want. But I know it looks like a bunch of PowerPoint slides with questions on them, but I swear we're going to get to stuff in a minute. So how you can take a quote out of context, which is done all the time, right? So let's look at a quote. This is from March 4th, 1913, if we're doing our sourcing, right? Our good historical thinking skill of sourcing. We look first and see who said it, in what, and when. So we're looking at March 4th, 1913, first inaugural address. So Wilson becomes president for the first time. Let every man look out for himself. Let every generation look out for itself. He said this.
and then he got into World War I.
Yes, context is great.
Well, I think that's, it's funny, I was just having a conversation with one of my friends. You've got to look at the time a statement is made.
Yeah.
Because after you make a statement, events are going to continue occurring, and
Yes.
things are going to change. And that is very important, because in some cases, because of the events, you have to change your mind.
Absolutely. Context. Now, what kind of impression does this give you, though? This quote taken out of a larger speech. What kind of impression does it? Yes?
Well, I think I look at it and assume that we know he's an isolationist. He doesn't support the war or any type of American conflict anywhere. But you could almost see that this is more of a like pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of statement.
Okay.
A rugged
like
individualism.
individualism,
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, he's like that also. He's like,
Any other impressions that you might get of Wilson from this?
Well, he was also a major progressive, so this makes him look like he's not, in a sense.
So this kind of makes you, it makes sense from a certain way, but not from another way? All right. Well, and this is what your students are bombarded with when they go on Facebook or Twitter or something like that all the time. It's a quote. You know it's taken from something. They might not have read everything that it's taken from. So let's look at a larger excerpt from this speech. There has been something crude and heartless and unfeeling in our haste to succeed and be great. Our thought has been, let every man look out for himself, let every generation look out for itself, while we reared giant machinery which made it impossible that any but those who stood at the levers of control should have a chance to look out for themselves. So now this makes more sense within the idea of him as a progressive? So if you had to put this into your own words, how would you rephrase it?
Some people have argued that everyone has to look out for himself, the generation has to, but if we do that, it leaves only a few capable of doing that.
Yeah.
The rest of us are left helpless.
Right. Not everyone can actually look out for themselves the same way others can. Okay. So, and yes, remember this is 1913. This is before the U.S. enters World War I, and there's a lot of other stuff that you would want to bring in here.
I have a question. If you go back to the other, did you have was it a period after itself?
Yeah, it was. Because when you take a quote out of a larger quote, good punctuation says you put a period at the end. So, yeah. So, yeah, that would be a case where maybe a ... would have been better. Maybe it would have changed your mind a little bit more. Yes, ma'am.
Let's just assume with the quote that there's a before and an after.
It can be assumed. Yeah. So,
Isn't that the point that's here? Isn't that the point here? That's what we want our students to know.
yes,
There's
exactly.
a context in what you put, everything that you see. You don't just see something and form a conclusion.
Now, I obviously did a very egregious example where he says, this is what I do not think, within the middle of a quote, and that's the only part I took out. But that happens in our news sources today. And we just want students to be aware of, okay, well, what was said before this, what was said after this, what happened before this, what happened after this, etc. All right, so, and this is something I took from PBS, which, when we can't find a Library of Congress, we usually go to PBS. They have lots of great stuff there. Okay, how can you take an image out of context? So a lot of people like to think, photograph never lies. It does lie. A non-photoshopped photograph can also lie depending on how it is used and deployed. So let's do this for a sec. Let's take a look at this photograph. And just tell me what you think is going on. Can you all see it? So you see a bunch of people down here, right? Bunch of people, could be march, could be parade. Why do you say Christmas? Okay, so there are strings of lights, and what else do you see? Some sort of piano advertisement. Oh, bunting? Here's bunting.
And is it like, looks like if it's a black and white photograph, but is it possibly red, white, and blue on the building?
Black and white photograph. I don't know. I'm guessing it's not like orange, white, and green, but it could be.
Right, that's what I'm saying, because if there's the little.
Right. You want your students to guess. It could be red, white, and blue, but you have to be like, you can't know. What's it?
Early in the morning. It's kind of foggy.
It's kind of foggy. This looks like the U.S. Capitol, so maybe we're in Washington, D.C. All right, good. Let's look at another photograph. What's going on in this photograph?
People are gathered to hear something or say something.
No, it's mixed. They're African Americans.
Okay, so I do see black people. I see white people. I see men. I see women.
Derbies, newsboy hats.
Lots of different kinds of hats. Which
There's a fedora down here. That puts us.
and other than this dude, everyone's looking off to the side.
You must have heard the
Very long.
camera.
Oh, that's right. Those two dudes. Formal occasion? Certainly very crowded, right? And a lot of various people. Any other thoughts about this?
Possibly wintertime.
And what makes you say that?
Dark colors and coats.
Lots of coats? Good.
People are wearing dark suit coats.
Yep. All right, ready to look at another photograph? Look at this photograph. What is going on here? New Zealand?
Looks like a pontiff there almost.
A what?
The Pope.
It's about women's.
The Pope?
Slow shutter speaking.
Look at his
Oh
hat.
my gosh!
Do you see his hat there? It's not quite tall enough, but
Yeah, okay.
Horses and automobiles at the same time.
Horses and automobiles?
that looks like the United States.
American flag.
A couple of them.
Maybe it's Olympics.
Maybe it's the Olympics?
Well, it's about women wanting to vote because New Zealand had the vote for women before we did. So they had already
Is it contest?
accomplished that.
So what's going on here?
Trying to get the point across.
Marching to get some sort of point across.
The point to have women vote.
Okay, so you think this is about women's suffrage? I do. Maybe because I told everybody this whole session was about that. But you would know anyway, right, Barbara? I knew it. You knew it. Okay, all of those come from this one photograph. So you've got your Capitol building. You've got, where's dude? Here's the dude. So this one right here. And you've got this going on right here. And this is saved at a high resolution. You can actually zoom in pretty closely if you look at this online. So I know that it's not quite as detailed for those of you sitting in the back. But can you start putting it together now and trying to imagine what is going on here? Because each of those different cropped images out of this larger one is just a piece that you can interpret a certain way. And some of them could be interpreted in slightly different ways or inaccurate ways. And so it's kind of the same thing that can be done with an image. It's like when you take a picture and you want to look like you're the only person at this historic site, so you crop out the elbows and the feet of all the people who got in the side frame, and it looks like I'm the only one here. That's not the truth, right? Harmless, right? Just for Facebook. It's a lie, but that's okay. So what is going on here? Where are we? Washington, D.C. When are we?
1916 to 1920.
Early 20th.
Early.
Teens, 20s. And you say that based on what?
The clothes they're wearing.
Clothes, the automobiles, the quality of the photograph. Good. And And what do you know was going on at that time? Wilson was inaugurated. What else? This is right before World War I, or maybe it's during World War I. We can't tell quite yet. Women's suffrage. So if this is a women's suffrage march or parade, what is all going on?
Men and women are curious watching.
Right, but why is the road blocked?
Because they're turning that way. The parade route's going on to
The parade route's going off to the side. See right here?
But they tried to stop women from having
It
those
looks like the
parades
road is blocked
also.
on them.
It's hard to tell. Yeah. But you can definitely see that the crowd is very, very large and thick. And the parade is not so thick. So, what's going to happen? Oh, and here you get a better picture of the bunting. And so you can tell here we have some more American flags. So, okay. So we are gonna look at this event the same way, but using now some sources from newspapers. This is remember how we just heard from Woodrow Wilson on March the 4th, 1913? That was his inauguration. The day before, there was a women's march on Washington. And that's kind of interesting because remember on Trump's inauguration, there was a women's march the day right after that. So that wasn't a new thing. Why would they stage a march the day before an inauguration?
the crowd.
There's a big crowd already there.
But isn't International Women's Day already in early March? Because that was the trigger for the February Revolution in Russia. Like it was the International Women's Day March that triggered the.
That's a really cool piece of context.
Okay, so let's look at some more sources. Oh, here's just another little cropped image thing that I keep forgetting is on the slide right afterwards. So what kind of impression do you get from this happy little woman?
She's old. She's been waiting a long time.
All right, so she's an older woman. Yeah. What do you think her sash says? Votes for women. And what do you think her drum says? Right. Here's the full thing. So now what does this political cartoon say?
I like the little man carrying the drum.
Right, right, right. And she's gigantic and he's tiny. So what kind of message is this sending? He's quite exerting. This is hurting his back. And somebody in that last session said they think that might be Wilson. I don't know if it's just supposed to be generic man or Wilson. What do you think?
He was tall.
Yes, but part of that oversized imagery is she's a little bit scary looking.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's a look that's got a little bit of mania working to it. Like I am going through here, and if you're in the way, you might get steamrolled.
And she's going to be heard.
Yeah, oh yeah. A drum like that. Okay, so it goes from maybe you think this cartoonist might be portraying her in a heroic light to maybe portraying her in a bit of an aggressive light. So again, how images can be cropped even though they're not themselves being changed is taking it out of context. Detecting bias, I guess, is what I'm doing here. So this is talking about this event, 5,000 women in parade. So we're going to look through here, and we're going to pull out all the words and phrases that might indicate some sort of bias on the part of the person who wrote it. So the Women's Suffrage Parade in Washington, D.C., March 3rd, was participated in by fully 5,000 women. Suffrage leaders from all over the world were there, and the pageant was one of the greatest ever led in the capital city. A mob of hoodlums sought to break up the parade, and the police were powerless to control them. U.S. cavalry from Fort Myer were rushed in and restored order. The wonderful courage and self-control exhibited by the women under such trying circumstances won them many laurels. The day was counted a great victory for the cause. This was published in the Beaver Herald from Oklahoma. So what words or phrases in here do you think might give some hint of bias?
Greatest ever.
Greatest ever, wonderful courage.
Mob of hoodlums.
Mob of hoodlums, yes. Powerless. Wonderful courage, self-control.
Great
Victory for the cause.
So what is the point of view, do you think, of the person who wrote this little article? They're definitely taking the side of the women's marchers. Yeah. Right. And for women's suffrage, because that is the cause that they're talking about here. So, yeah. I think that your students might gloss over some words and think, well, because this is written in a newspaper, and because these words aren't really that difficult, they just don't really stop and think that they're coloring maybe their attitudes. So stopping and actually underlining these things is a good way for them to detect the bias and start deconstructing.
Even fully 5,000. Why not just say 5,000?
Right. Fully 5,000. That's a good one that I missed. Yeah. 5,000. Be impressed. Right?
I think all over the world is.
All over the world?
And leaders.
Right. Well, we know that there were some from New Zealand, right? Yeah. So this was participated in by law. The word pageant. Yeah. Yeah, right. Like the Memphis riot versus the Memphis massacre. What happened in 1866? There was that controversy over what we're going to call it on our Tennessee historical marker. It makes a lot of difference in public perception. Okay, let's look at facts versus impressions. Now this is kind of going to be what we're going to be doing during the rest of the activity. So again, what do you think that you can trust to be a fact, and what do you think is just an impression created by the author? So let's look at this from the Caucasian, which is from Clinton, North Carolina, March 6, 1913, talking about the same event. Blah, blah, blah. Miss Helen Keller, the noted deaf and blind girl, was so exhausted and unnerved by the experience in attempting to reach a grandstand where she was to have been a guest of honor that she was unable to speak later at Continental Hall. So what do you think the facts were in this episode? Helen Keller did not speak. What else? Helen Keller is blind and deaf.
She was supposed to have been on a grandstand, but didn't make it.
Helen Keller was supposed to be up on a grandstand. Helen Keller did not make it to the grandstand.
She was supposed to be a guest of honor.
She was supposed to be a guest of honor. She suffered an indignity. Is that a fact or impression? How about she was supposed to speak at Continental Hall? Okay, now what do you think are the impressions?
Indignant, like something happened prior to this.
Okay, so an indignity happened that prevented her from doing this.
So something traumatic. It's not just it's traumatic. She's exhausted, unnerved just by making the effort. So there's trauma involved here.
Yeah.
What else might be impressions coloring the way that they chose the words here?
Maybe because she's deaf and blind, she's more frail than another person might be.
She was unnerved.
Yeah.
A girl or a woman at this point in time.
I wonder how old she is. They
Yeah,
refer to her as a
how
girl,
old is she?
but I bet you she's in her 30s.
Yeah, we should probably find out exactly how old she would have been and why, if that means that describing her as a girl.
She had to be older.
She was in her 30s.
Sure, she'd be a young woman.
So why the color girl? Noted.
And again, why did you leave that?
She was born in
Put a name down.
1880? Okay, she was 33. Or possibly just 32.
And they could have called her like advocate, or I mean, she's not just speaking because she's deaf and blind. Like she has a role. So you use girl instead of like leader or advocate or something like that.
Right. or even an advocate for women's suffrage. They called her the noted deaf and blind girl, like she's in some circus.
Well, let's consider the times, and I'm not going to say that sexist or not sexist. Obviously, in our 21st century morality, we think it's sexist. Back then, that's common to call a young lady this or to call a woman this. So take that out, forget that. The impressions here are simply that somebody suffered indignity, perhaps more than one, somebody was exhausted, and somebody was unnerved. But everything else, you're talking about Miss Helen Keller was supposed to speak, and she was supposed to be a guest of honor. Those are the facts. Everything else is impression. And why even worry about the blind girl unless we're going to make an argument about what is sexism and what is not sexism?
Well, I think the point was the way that she was described, and her role as a leader in the suffrage movement was completely left out.
Again, we're talking about the times, though. Are we going to apply 21st century morality to what back then?
I'm not talking about morality.
No, I'm sorry, not morality. I shouldn't use that word, but sensibilities, perhaps. Are we going to talk about what we refer to in the 21st century?
Well, I'm not talking about the girl versus woman thing. I'm talking about the fact that just her accomplishments as a deaf and blind woman are being brought up, and not necessarily any kind of leadership roles she had within women's suffrage movement. That was what I believe was your point. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Well, I just heard the word girl and...
Well, that was something that we were discussing, and yeah, you want to make sure that your students know that. But again...
but even today, the New York Times gets flack because they've kept a newspaper policy of referring to people with that, like Mr. or Ms. Or so, like they look for a title to put in front of their name instead of simply referring to them by their last name when they write about them, or unless there's a title.
Yes. Just like if you look at a lot of newspapers from, even today and a while ago, women were referred to Mrs. husband's name. Yeah, and I know that. I know that infuriate me, but it's totally fine to a lot of people. But yeah, I'm not going to shove that onto everybody else's sensibilities today. Okay. Oh yeah, I do have some underlines. Okay, I don't know why I have this one in here. Oh yeah, I know why. Remember going back to the idea that there was a mob of hoodlums and the police were powerless to control them, right? That might be spun a couple different ways. So I was like, well, what actually happened here? And so I did some digging, and I thought that this was going to be a case of blaming the police. But it turned out that everyone actually blamed the police for this. This didn't seem to be a controversial thing. So whether or not you thought the police did a good job or a bad job was, well, maybe a little bit controversial, but most people were thinking, because they actually launched an investigation into the demanding an explanation from the city authorities for their failure to have the police properly protect the woman marching. So this actually reaches these high echelons that they're putting this kind of inquest into the police's behavior, because it wasn't until the cavalry came in for Fort Myer that they actually were able to restore some order there. Oh, and I love this. Is it in here, or is it the later ones?
Used her whip to good advantage.
Oh, yeah, well, before I get to that one, I guess this is some of the later ones. The Boy Scouts actually come and help the cavalry, so the Boy Scouts come out and help restore order where the police do not. But yeah, and then the women literally had to fight their way. And so then you have women. Here's Inez Milholland. Here she is on horseback here. She's like an MC. And these women were just they were just riding horses, as some groups do in parades. And they have their, their riding whips. And they ended up using them to kind of fend off the crowd. And then here we have that word again, hoodlums, making insults, etc. So it's actually turned into quite an interesting story. So I wanted to look into it a little bit further. Okay.
Those gathered in front of the official reviewing stand that Mrs. Taft, the former First Lady, and her daughter and others were forced to leave before the parade had passed. In other words, hoodlums there first, the things that they were shouting, her sensibilities were such that...
Yeah, exactly. Or the security grabbed them and were like, you're getting out of here before it gets rowdy, or it's too rowdy, you're getting out of here, or this is not a place I want to be. So this is kind of interesting. We're getting another view of what happened in terms of the hoodlums and wondering, okay, well, is this just a case of a bunch of hoodlums or not? And so I was wanting to look it up, and I found a New York Times, and of course, when you say New York Times, everybody's going to have an instant knee-jerk reaction. But the New York Times took a lot of, it actually asked an open question, what did you think about it? And invited a lot of people to write in. And then it published all these letters to the editors just a few days after this event. And so I went through those letters and got 6 different representative examples. And we're going to divide into 6 groups, which is great because we have 6 tables. This is perfect. And you're each going to read one. And I do need to mention that this activity grew out of a lesson idea that was in our January newsletter, our Teaching Historical Thinking newsletter. And it was originated by 2 of my students in my 3011 class who started this, and I'm very proud of them. Okay, so you're already in groups. Those of you seated in the back will just have to kind of squish in to a table or not. And I have 4 copies of each source. So if somebody wants to come up here, then I'll have enough for each of you. Otherwise, you just kind of share. But sir, you want to come up here? Or ma'am? Either one. Okay, so each of you are going to get one of these 6 different sources. I mean, each group, that is. Okay, you guys are that one. Now, what I want you to do is go through and do the facts versus impressions activity, kind of exercise that we just did. What do you think you can count on as being a fact, and why? And what do you think you can only label as an impression? It's because they obviously use
The fact is that there is some complaining in the first and second letter. Treatment received. Now, a quote from her perspective, or whoever this individual is, from their perspective, treatment received while myself and friends were marching in the suffrage parade. So there's a fact there that we're involved in the parade. So, brutal though, that's an impression. That's an emotionally filled. You hear the word brutal, you automatically think of, a violent act.
It could be horses that were people that were there. Yeah, gentlemen. Could be the horses from them as well.
I'm trying to think of the picture that she showed us there at the beginning, because there was in that shot of the parade itself, there were men in uniform on horseback on the right. Obviously weren't crowding it, but the reason why it catches my interest is that he refers to them like horses used by the riders, but he feels perfectly comfortable calling out the cops, calling out the policemen later on for their shortcomings. So I wonder why he didn't say, like, the horses used by the policemen in trying to keep back the crowd were jolting and jarring us as well.
I think it's just because I think that's the time period. That's what they used to say when people made
like high schoolers.
Yeah, but that's what they used to say when people would make vulgar comments or.
And later on, probably 30s and 40s, that changed to just hoods.
Yeah.
Say hoodlums anymore, just went to hoods.
Yeah.
All right, we're getting really depressed over here, so it's time to start reporting out. We're going to go through these, and see, I skipped some PowerPoint slides, and we are still going to be a little rushed at the end, but that's okay because it's getting rushed in order to leave. But we have 15 minutes. I want to go through all 6, and then if we have time at the end, of course this whole thing was supposed to be about corroboration, right? If we have time, we'll talk about corroboration at the end. But basically, those of you who go last are going to be an advantage to those of you who go first, because you're going to be able to hear what everybody else says and be like, huh, our source echoes this person, or our person says something completely opposite of this person. So you can build on that as you go through. So who has Mary Stevens? This table. All right. You don't have to go through every single fact and every single impression, but basically list some good examples of what's very clearly a fact and what's very clearly an impression, and also tell me if you think this person seems to be supporting the marchers or supporting the police.
Well, the fact is that it's the day before the inauguration.
Okay.
And in fact, that it was a problem, it was crowded.
There was a problem with the march.
There was a problem with the march. I think we'll all agree on that. What were some of the main impressions then?
She believed that the young girl shouldn't have been marching, that their parents should have told them not to. They should have had the sense to warn them not to, and then that the older ones should have had the sense themselves to know this is not a good idea, and the people there only were there for the inauguration.
Okay, so in her mind, that crowd was there just to see the inauguration, and they didn't want to see a bunch of women marchers who shouldn't even have been there. Okay, so clearly she was not sympathetic towards the women marchers.
She also said that the police force was totally inadequate.
But she also says the police force was inadequate
To their needs.
Okay.
Our needs,
Our needs, yes.
you know, everybody.
And she
So
said,
there just weren't enough of the police.
she said, don't blame the District of Columbia for the actions of outside hoodlums.
Of outsider what?
Outside hoodlums.
Okay, so she agrees that there were hoodlums, but it's not the police's fault, right? Is that what she's saying?
It's not really the police's fault that it happened, but she doesn't believe that they did anything to really help with the situation.
Okay, all right then. Anything else you want to add?
She says don't blame us, don't blame the citizens of this community, because we act right. It's, all y'all that came here.
It's just the outsiders bringing in the trouble. We hear that a lot, right? Okay, that's good. All right, what about S.M. Goldfarrell?
Speaking of outsiders bringing in trouble. He is one of the bandsmen with the Illinois delegation of suffragettes. So he was a musician marching with the band that was leading the Illinois delegation.
Fact. So he was there. Oh, was Miss Stevens there? Do you know or not?
No, I don't think so.
Can't tell from what she writes. That's another thing to think about. Was this person there? So
He identifies himself.
fact, he was there.
One of the things that, that you can see upon his fact is that he describes the events, the marching, he describes, the crowd and how the crowd was kind of swallowed up, like formed and wouldn't let the parade through. He says that he witnessed men lay hands on the marching women. Now, second to that, we discussed how he says it was very indecent, and we argued what determines indecent behavior. So that was something that may show a little bit of bias. We can say that it happened, but argue the indecency of it.
Okay, so you're not going to dispute the fact that he saw men grab hold of women, but whether or not they did it in an indecent way is the spin that he's giving it. Okay. That's a good way to separate out just a tight statement.
He also goes on to say that the only guards that really did any good on that occasion were the troopers from Fort Myer, any two of which did more good than the entire cordon of police.
Is that a fact or an impression?
Well, but there again, you can see that maybe a little bit of both. I mean, he's saying that one group did a good job, but he's maybe exaggerating to their effect.
Okay.
Possibly.
He does describe behavior by the policeman. He said, when a policeman was not doing his job in protecting the marchers, he was upbraided by a brother musician, the policeman laughed at the person who operated him. When people from the crowd were making fun of the women, the police laughed along with the crowd. And the Boy Scouts who looked pleadingly at the police got little encouragement.
Okay, so the fact that he saw policemen laughing, there's a difference between saying, oh, he touched her in an indecent manner, because that could be argued either way, but he would have had to completely fabricate the fact that the police were laughing. Now, why they were laughing could have been open to dispute, but yes, there's an extent to which you have to think, well, why would this person say this?
Those are all things that you can look to corroborate in other sources.
All right, good. Any last thoughts on Goldfarrell?
Well, he makes the statement at the end that in 16 years' experience in parading in various sections of the United States, I can frankly say this was the most disgraceful parade I've ever participated in. So he's saying that he has experience marching, which makes you wonder, why is he marching in what context? But saying that this was the most disgraceful.
Okay, so this definitely stands out for him in a negative way. All right, good. Marie Johnstone. All right.
I just wrote down some of the facts that we talked about. Like she observed, and from what it looks like, she was there. But a man kept grabbing at one of the women's ankles. A policeman was laughing at the situation.
Sorry, this is my corroboration.
A woman proceeded to hit a man with a whip.
I saw that.
Again, they use the word hoodlums, but they're saying that those hoodlums were people that wore vulgar badges and suggestions. So, and that there wasn't as much activity, it seemed to be occurring closer to Pennsylvania Avenue, where you're getting closer to the president's automobile. And
right. Why would they calm down when they get close to the president's automobile?
the police started actually doing their job, basically, when they were closer to the president.
Okay. So, did you get an idea of any kind of sympathies on the part of this writer? What were they?
She doesn't have a lot of faith in the police.
Okay.
She refers to them as, well, she says if they would enforce the good laws and quit worrying about traffic violations and do their job, that maybe they would earn their salaries.
What everybody says when they've been pulled over, right?
And police are always active in the presence of wealth, authority, or prominence.
Okay, then. Yeah. So the police are making their own judgments about when they're going to actually do their jobs and when they're not.
One last thing, she mentioned that the hoodlums were both sexes. I don't know, but I just assumed men. That's kind of like the picture I was painting in my mind, but apparently it was both women and men.
How many of you, when you heard the word hoodlums, thought of a group of young men? Interesting. Yes. I know that when people say hoodlums on the news now, there's a picture that comes to mind in a lot of people's heads. So that's interesting that maybe there were female hoodlums in there too. So in other words, just kind of like rowdy people. Troublemakers. All right, thank you. What about the participant and spectator? They're two separate ones, but they're both so short and they're kind of similar, so they were grouped together, but if there are differences, you can point them out.
Well, they were both participants in the parade.
All right, good.
So they start out for it. We all agreed that one of the basic facts was there was a problem with the march, but the facts were shrouded in a lot of really loaded observations and impressions about it. The description of being forced to walk single file.
Who was forced to walk single file?
The participant. We were forced to walk single file. They say so. How, is that really a factual thing?
Our source corroborates that.
Okay.
So all sorts of smutty, insulting remarks made by drunken men and Negroes.
Oh, okay. Drunken men And Negroes.
Specified out. And the Spectator does the same thing. We were, white men and Negroes cursed us.
So this is men here.
Okay, so they're not talking about men and women, they're talking about men and Negroes.
And the Spectator says we were knocked down, trodden
Okay.
on, and crushed, and we couldn't get out of the mob, and there was not a policeman in sight.
Okay, police not doing their jobs. I think that's been corroborated through most of the sources, even yours, right?
Yeah, but we thought there were probably just very few facts here. It was crowded, there was problems, there was verbal abuse.
It happened on March 3rd.
And it happened on March.
Well, there you go. Well, we'll also think about it. If you are in a crush like that and there's some chaos, it's kind of hard to establish what's truly going on there. It really kind of disintegrates into a bunch of impressions. So, yeah, we just got to piece it together from all these various impressions, right? Any last thoughts on participant and spectator? All right, thank you. Male marcher.
Facts included that the police looked on and smiled as ladies were intruded upon, and along the route from 1st to about 12th Street, I did not recall seeing but one mounted policeman. While on Tuesday they were everywhere. There's a lot of impressionistic sort of stuff there. Outrageous conduct of the police.
Responsible heads should be dropped.
Yeah, that the reason that the police behave in this way is because they have this autocratic government that is, citizens of Washington, D.C., they're not citizens of the United States, and they don't have the right to vote and remove these people who are in charge of the police.
That's an interesting thing to bring up.
Yeah.
But some of the officials definitely need to be removed, he thinks.
Yeah.
Okay, so not sympathetic towards the police in this case. Okay, good. A witness.
Our witness is definitely sympathetic to the police. More so than the women. There's not a whole lot that's definitely facts. He describes how, or I assume it's a he, describes how it was kind of a mess and there were people pushing into the parade route. And he says that that the inauguration was calm compared to the women's march. But there's no specific details other than that I can say are definitely facts. There's a lot of impression and his opinion about why the women were marching, and he says that they got what they wanted, which was more advertising, and he kind of takes this opinion that they were kind of trying to incite this riot or mess to get people, to get advertising for their cause, and he says that's not the police's fault.
Okay, so the women did it knowing it was going to create this.
Yeah, and the police learned crowd control from the day before, so that was better than the second day because they learned what they were doing.
And they were actually doing their jobs on the second day because it was the president's event.
Did you see any interviews or perspectives from the side of the police? Because that might...
No, I was looking for them. I didn't find them. Of course, I didn't spend a month researching. I just, we only have this amount of time to do each and every one of these things, and we get as deep as we can. But I wanted to ask you guys, what kinds of things you would want your students to research that you think might fill in some more of the puzzle pieces here, because we have a lot of impressions. And the thing is that we actually create a lot of facts based on an aggregate of impressions. And so what would we actually start being able to say with confidence? That's not the same thing as a fact, right? But there are some things that we can say with confidence happened. So what do you think we can say about what happened at this event? I think that's a fact.
People acted inappropriately.
Okay, there were people who acted inappropriately.
And the police did not have as much control or did not try to exude as much control.
The police were not in control. They were ineffective.
Yes, and the military were effective.
Cavalry, save the day. What else can we start saying, though? What happened to these women?
They were physically assaulted.
Okay.
Things become scattered.
Yeah.
In the time, any male reaching over and making physical contact with a woman in public, no.
Well, let's say
Would it be
grab. I mean, if
indecent?
someone reaches out and grabs a woman
That's
by the
no.
shoulder, that's going to be counted as assault, probably.
Yeah.
Like even now.
How do they grab at their ankles? I mean, one of them obviously like.
Because the women were on the horses. And then they got whacked.
Wondering for the marchers, is someone really like?
You're right. I was just assuming that they were only grabbing at the ankles of women on horses. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, your students might say things like that too, so you got to anticipate that. So, what other kinds of things do we think that we can know about this event?
There was a lot of social disagreement about whether or not women should have the right to vote, and that it was extremely volatile inside that political arena.
So because there was so much controversy over whether or not women should be allowed to vote, you can see that bleeding out in the way people are interpreting what happened at this event. So, yeah, and then you might want to...
But also what happened offended even the sensibilities of people opposed to the marchers.
Yes. Now, this is a really key source because you might want to trust more the people who would seem to come down on the side of the police, but even they have to admit, all right, the women shouldn't be there, but okay, the police didn't really do much. So that right there, I mean, yeah. Somebody on one side actually contradicting what you'd think that they would be saying is something that people want to take to the bank most of the time.
And in a lot of cases, equal protection under the law is not happening. And that's exactly what the women were there to say.
Beautiful.
You guys did a great job. Police, thank you so much. You did a great job of saying what we came here to say.
Right, and maybe that's a case of they knew that was going to happen. This helped advertise their cause. We'd have to do more research. So what kinds of things would you guys want to know now? What would you want to research now?
I would like to see the follow-up, see did that Senate investigation that
Yeah.
you showed us, did that happen?
Right.
Was there any shakeup in city government?
Yeah, and there are lots more. I read a lot of newspaper articles about this. I don't remember exactly what the fallout was.
Well, as we talked, I would like to know more about the marchers, the suffragists, like what did they do maybe prior to this or after this in response to this parade?
Yeah, and actually, you know, we actually have a Devil Child Story Stirs All Chicago Fake News Lesson Plan, which is really cool. It's about Jane Addams' Hull House. But we have the Devil Baby. Sorry. Here's an official program from the Women's March on Washington that we just did. So there's actually a good amount of sources on the Library of Congress through the National Women's Suffrage Association collection, and there are a couple other Votes for Women collections too that you can look up. And of course, all of the newspapers through Chronicling America that I got all of these things from, and you can actually look and see, well, what happens the next day and how is it reported around the country. Of course, usually it's just one story that's repeated almost exactly the same through all these other places, but sometimes you can get a different point of view.